Good morning. On behalf of Citizens for Modern Transit, I'd like to welcome you to our quarterly Talking Transit event. Today, we're going to be discussing creating an environment for transit-oriented development success. Thank you to all the CMT board members who have joined us this morning. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our platinum and gold sponsors, including AARP in St. Louis, Bi-State Development, the City of Belleville, the Realtor Association of Southwestern Illinois, St. Clair County Transit District, Washington University in St. Louis, BJC Healthcare, Gonzalez Companies, Greater St. Louis Inc., H&TB, the Missouri and Laborers District Council, and ULICO. We would not be able to provide these updates in our programming without their support, so thank you very much. Thank you also to everyone who has joined us this morning. We are really excited for all of you on the call to really delve into what we need in the St. Louis region to create an environment ripe for development near transit. The St. Louis region is seeing movement with regards to development around transit. The expo at the Forest Park Developer Transit Center has opened phase 1 with a significant portion of residents arriving carless. The senior living development at the Swansea Station has a wait list longer than the units available. Yet there is still significant development gaps around transit stations and stops across the region. What is missing to entice more development? What do we need to have in place to create more favorable environment for development near transit? Today, we have a group of panelists that are going to help answer some of those questions. Joel Foose is the principal with Trevor Architects. Katie Seabaugh is the senior vice president and McCormick Baron Salazar. And John Langa is the vice president of economic development at Metro Transit. Unfortunately, our final panelist, Erin Burnett, had to cancel this morning. However, these three leaders will discuss their projects and the associated policies and ordinances that would create more pro-development environments around transit. From CMT's perspective, creating positive environments for development has a direct impact on ridership on the system. If we can build origins and destinations, we're going to see ridership grow and we're going to see the benefits of transit in tenfold. We also know that there are lots of questions about these projects and future projects. So please make sure to place your questions this morning in the chat box or in the Q&A, and I will get to them as soon as possible. Let's start by allowing our panelists to provide an overview of their projects they have worked on or are currently underway. We will then open it up for questions. Joel, there's been a lot of news recently about the Expo project. Could you provide an update on the Expo project, which is demonstrating that if you can build it, they will arrive carless or a certain percentage will?
Certainly, and I'm going to get to that, Kim. I want to just say good morning to everyone that's joining us today for this discussion. This is always a great moment for us to discuss what's needed in order to move our region forward. There's probably a lot of you that are familiar with our work that Trivers does throughout the region. We really look for Trivers to exist to create work of lasting positive consequence. So we really want our work to really have a positive impact on our built environment, especially here in St. Louis. And we share our work life with a diverse group of people with whom we share a vision and also enjoy spending time internally and externally. And we really hope that outcome is impact. So what that's led for us, is some of our work that I'll just touch briefly on. A lot of it is rooted here in St. Louis region. This is just a smattering of a little bit of our projects. A lot of our projects that many of you might know are urban-based, civic-based projects here. Adaptive reuse is a big part of what we do. And really what that allows us to do is really focus on our urban context and really areas that are accessible to transit, walkability, connectedness, and really enhancing the built environment that we've had here in St. Louis and looking ahead. One of those projects that some of you might know is our adaptive reuse project at the Woodward Lofts. It was a Woodward printing company in the Grove. If we can go to the next slide. And oh, I'm sorry, I'm one slide ahead. So with that, I would say that we can go back one, Travis. Thank you. You know, what we talk about in all of these projects here is placemaking, and placemaking is an important aspect of you know, looking at our environment. If we can go one slide ahead, please. Thank you. And really thinking about the assets that we have in our community, right? You know, we're talking about capitalizing on our local community's assets, inspiration, potential, with the intention of creating public spaces that promote people's health, happiness, and well-being. You know, that doesn't happen by accident. That takes a lot of forethought. It takes a lot of people coming together with a lot of different perspectives, and you know, a common goal that we really need to move forward, you know, in creating our environments. I talk about all the time that we don't have mountains, we don't have a San Diego climate, we don't have an ocean here in St. Louis. You know, it's our built environment and our culture and our people to really, you know, make it, you know, a place that people want to spend time in. And, you know, that's really important for us to think about how each one of these decisions we make today will impact what our future generations will experience, you know, 10, 15, 50, 100 years from now. And that's important. So, you know, this is just a smattering. We can go to the next slide. You know, a lot of our projects, as I mentioned, are adaptive reuse. While this is adjacent to a rail line, this is a commercial rail line, not necessarily a commuter rail line. You know, but we always talk about this project being adjacent to the hipster superhighway of bike lanes on Tower Grove Avenue. And we really designed this building for the transit user of bicycles and in and out of this building, as we designed it for 164 apartments here. Next slide, please. And really that, as I mentioned, is thinking about the design as we go from, you know, the public space to the semi-public to the semi-private to the private spaces sequence. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is just a little flavor of some of our adaptive reuse projects that some of you that might have seen, you know, around the area. Next slide. Adaptive reuse isn't all that we do. We also do new construction. Again, this is a urban environment project. This is what's known as the Shake Shack building, built on Euclid and West Pine in the Central West End. Again, thinking about that placemaking, mixed uses, you know, how people are coming in and out, you know, of the building and experiencing that on a day-to-day environment for an 18-hour city. Next slide. Another one of those examples, you know, is the steel coat flats and the steel coat lofts buildings in the off of Grand Avenue and Grand and Shoto. And you know, this building, when it was conceived, was really an island, and it's important for us to think about that infrastructure that surrounds, and again, that connective tissue. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but and how we get to point A to point B, and maybe this is, you know, where we have some of the shortcomings, where we have this building really less than a half a mile from the Grand Center Station, but still have some difficulties being able to get people from this development to a light rail station or even up to the Grand Bridge until some of the additional infrastructure improvements are made. Next slide. And then finally, we'll talk most about this project is our Expo at Forest Park. As Kim mentioned, we are days away from completion of the south building, which is the one in the foreground here. The north building was completed a couple months back and has had, you know, a really interesting lease up where we've had about 50% of the tenants not bringing cars with them as they occupy the north building, and the south building, we will see what follows suit with that. But we'll talk more about this project soon. But as I mentioned, it's literally days away from finalizing. There's a Field Foods that's being built out in the ground floor of the north building as we speak. 267 units, 360 parking spaces, and 20,000 square feet of retail. So really a TOD from its inception. Okay, I think I might have gone over, Kim.
It's okay. We'll allow it today. Thank you, Joel, for your opening comments. We're now going to, and if you have any questions for Joel or for any of our panelists, as a reminder, please place those in the Q&A or in the chat box, and we will get to those. I'd now like to welcome Katie Seabaugh. We know that McCormick Barron has done significant work in East St. Louis, including Emerson Park and other areas. I like to say that Parsons Place is truly the first TOD in the region and has been going strong since the opening of Metrolink. Could you talk a little bit about how transit has played a role in McCormick Barron's work?
Yeah, so I was looking at Joel's slide saying, wouldn't it be helpful if I had had pictures of our TODs across the country? But Joel actually had one of our, so in addition to Emerson Park and a couple of slides on, I have pictures of Emerson Park, and it's an interesting TOD because it was an early example of taking advantage of Metrolink and bringing assets to Metrolink. But a lot of people will look at it and say, well, my goodness, that's not dense. That's not dense enough. And what is the relationship of the housing to the station other than being transit adjacent? And I think in the case of East St. Louis, it was very important for everyone who doesn't know what Emerson Park is. Emerson Park's a affordable housing development directly adjacent to the Emerson Park station. And at the time that we were building it, it was very, very important to East St. Louis to have high quality housing. It's one of the few examples of high quality affordable rental housing in East St. Louis. Most of East St. Louis is single family home, a lot of single family homes and a lot of smaller 4 and 6 unit buildings that are individually owned. And so Emerson Park is a large development that's managed by a professional property management company. It's affordable housing, and it created connections to that station before anyone in the region was thinking about how do we create connections to the station. And in the case of East St. Louis, there aren't many jobs for the families who are living in that affordable housing development, and being adjacent to that station gives them access to jobs across the region. So we see it as not creating a note of excitement around necessarily Emerson Park, although the recent addition of Jazz that East St. Louis Housing Authority built has given some more commercial feel and some more density to the area around the Emerson Park station. But what it does is it takes advantage of that transit to make those connections between affordable housing and economic development and jobs. McCormick Barron is a national affordable housing developer. We're based on 100 North Broadway with Trivers, and we've been working really since the beginning of the idea of transit-oriented development on transit-oriented developments across the country. Our best examples, I think, are in Los Angeles. We have 3 really strong examples of what you can do with transit-oriented development that were done in partnership with the Los Angeles Metro. One is called Metro Hollywood, and it's actually built above the Metro station, the Metro Hollywood station, light rail station, and is affordable housing stacked on top of uses that families thought that they needed for to be adjacent to the station. So it's got a large courtyard around the station. The design of the building matches the look of the station, and it has a daycare, a dry cleaners, a small cafe, all of which contribute to that station area. And those are the things we look for now, and the opportunities we look for now when it comes to sort of creating place at a station. So then the the thing we wanted to talk about that I'm really excited to talk about is the East St. Louis Choice Neighborhood Transformation Plan, where we are trying to we are striving, and we applied this year and we're a finalist this year, but we were not selected to get a choice grant this year. But working with HUD, with the East St. Louis Housing Authority, with the City of East St. Louis, with strong partners like the Jackie Joyner Kirsty Center, as well as other developers who are working within East St. Louis to start to not just rebuild parts of East St. Louis, but then take the opportunity to rebuild parts of East St. Louis to connect to the stations. So this map here, I think, is really important. It's the choice neighborhood. The blue boundary is our choice neighborhood boundary. The sort of illustrated places are where there is potential development or existing development, existing new development. And you can see East St. Louis is rich, absolutely rich with light rail stations. So it just in this little choice neighborhood, there's 5th and Missouri, Emerson Park, and JJK that kind of frames this whole thing. And the challenge for us is, how do we make connections between what's going on, which are the blue circles, and those blue rectangles of the stations? How do we make sure that if we're not directly next to 5th and Missouri, that the people at Gompers Homes, which is number 5, have connections down to 5th and Missouri, or a connection up to Emerson Park? And that's the challenge we've been working on, because when you have these transit assets, they really, you really have a wonderful opportunity to make them part of the become the anchors of the community. And Travis, if you want to go to the next slide, just a sort of a broader view to give more context of where in East St. Louis we're talking. It's where Gompers is in sort of the heart of the downtown area of East St. Louis. Audubon Terrace is another public housing site that we are hoping to redevelop with the grant. And then Parsons Place is outlined in orange. And you can see on this slide how all of the freeways have sort of cut up East St. Louis and divided East St. Louis. And then, but also the connectivity and how close East St. Louis is to downtown St. Louis. Next slide, Travis. And then it's always important to show a nice, pretty rendering. Again, the housing vision for Gompers and for Audubon looks a lot like Parsons Place, because we don't see this as a sort of downtown commercial area, but rather as a residential area that has urban connections to transit in the region. And next slide. And then for those of you who are not familiar with Parsons Place, I wanted to show an example of what, some examples of what Parsons Place looks like. So it is, again, a little bit more suburban, because that is what this community is striving to be right now. It's not super suburban. It's not super large setbacks. It's the middle upper picture is showing 3 townhouse units. So there is density to it, but it is not, certainly not the feel that you're getting at Forest Park Station.
And Katie, just so you know, we're lucky enough to have a resident of Parsons Place who has joined us this morning on the call.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's I think that's my intro.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. So now we wanted to invite John Langa, the VP of Economic Development at Bi-State, before we jump into the conversation on what's missing to build a market around transit. John is charged with looking at enticing development around the stations and stops in the St. Louis region. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you if you'd like to say a few opening remarks.
Yeah, Kim, thank you. Again, I'm John Langa with Bi-State Development, and we work diligently on TOD on properties that we own, that we control. We work with consultants and developers on pre-development planning to make the market aware of the possibilities on those sites. Examples are the Swansea project, as well as the DeBoliver project that's netted over $100 million of private investment. about 340 units of housing, about 25,000 square foot of retail. And we will find out here in the next week or so. Another project is going forward that's up at our North Handley Station, the workforce housing project known as University Crossing, which also then has in it, through Employment Connections, employee support and financial literacy support also for the residents who would live there. We view that as a great product and a great pilot product for our station areas with the housing and the employment support. Something that's real important to us is the front end work that in the case of CMT that they do at their walk audits, and then also the station activation projects they do in conjunction with AARP. And both of those we think help set the stage for TOD thought and TOD action. For properties that we do not own but are near our stations, we work in conjunction with those developers any way possible. We do not control incentives. We do not control zoning, but we do whatever we can to make sure that our stations integrate as well as possible with the built environment that's being created and that development benefits our stations and vice versa. So, Kim, thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. So as a reminder to everyone, if you'd like to place your comments or your questions in the Q&A box or the chat box, we're going to jump right in with some questions. And just a little background, this topic came out of CMT's TOD committee, which is comprised of developers, planners, and others who are interested in seeing what can happen around the stations in the St. Louis region. One of the conversation points we had a couple of months ago is, developers are interested, but we need help from the municipalities in the city and the county and St. Clair County on making sure that there's ordinances and policies in place that help bring the development to the station. And there's been a lot of commentary already in the chat box about people being curious about what is needed. So from your perspectives, what policies or ordinances need to be tweaked? What's missing? What can help us bring more development to the areas around the stations? I mean, we walked 5th of Missouri on Monday. There's a lot of opportunity around that station. What needs to be in place?
Joel, can you talk about parking? Because you have a really great parking story that I want to shout from the rooftops.
Yes. Kim, to answer your question, I mean, parking, it's top of mind on really every development that we get involved with. And everyone talks about how easy it is to drive in St. Louis and everybody needs their car and all that. So the parking conversation is multi-tiered. I think we have to think broader about where people are connecting with transit, how extensive our transit system is, as a big idea, right? And we need to think about that. We need to think about the expense of a car in the conversation about affordable housing and how much it costs to live, not just rental rates, but how much it costs to own and operate a car, how much it costs to get to and from certain places. And then we can hone in on the developments themselves. To build a parking stall, in today's rates, you're talking, especially structured parking, and with a lot of the developments that we're working with in more urban environments, you're talking between $25,000 to $30,000 a space. And so you think about if you're building a garage, of what, 100 cars, you're talking $3 million. To just build a place to house cars. The success that we're seeing in the rentals at Expo, I mean, that building is built, pretty much on top of the station. I think if we got any closer to that, Bi-State would claim that we're encroaching a little too much on their property. So we have more than enough parking capacity at that building to accommodate. The zoning for that really is one parking spot per dwelling unit. And, we're, as we mentioned in the opening, we're finding in the lease ups that, people are not even coming with cars because they can get to and from places very easily because of the connection to the alignment and connection to the bus stops and so forth. So, you know, parking, that's what we deal with. And until we understand that TOD projects do not need to hit a 1 per dwelling unit, or even in other municipalities where you have a 2 per dwelling unit zoning minimum, that money that is leveraged to essentially house a car, can be used elsewhere. It can be put into the development. It can be put into public infrastructure, sidewalks, other things that that parking cost goes to pay for. So there's really an opportunity for us to re-leverage the money that's spent into a more public benefit versus a benefit to house an automobile.
And something else on that, right now there's a form-based code going through that area, which I'm going from memory, but has about 0.5 per 1 unit as a model that would be in that code that would then give the developers on the front end clarity. The other is not all of our locations have that parking demand. For instance, at Swansea, we have available parking on the rest of the lot. At North Hanley, we were in a similar situation, at least on the first projects. But as those projects start occurring at those locations, they're going to start filling up just like a more urban dense environment. So in those, it may be more of a patterned phased process for that absorption, which we're seeing a very different approach at Expo. As far as zoning, right now, if in fact MHDC makes its approvals for the University Crossing project up at North Hanley, then they're an unincorporated St. Louis County. They will be starting their zoning process. So we've actually thought at Bi-State, do we front end zone everything, or do we work with the developer as they come in to get through those processes? I don't know if there's a right answer on that, and it may depend on location as much as anything else.
Yeah, okay. John, if I can just touch on that, I mean that was one of the challenges with the Expo project, because the neighborhood had passed the form-based code, as buy-in for that area, right. But the zoning books for the city were still, right. were still law that we had to abide by. So even though that site had been targeted to really say no parking required at all, those hadn't been formalized yet. And so that's a challenge when you're trying to design for the desires of the people going forward, but then the laws on the books are still saying something else.
Okay, so quick question for you, Joel. Is the parking at the Expo unbundled from the rent itself?
I believe it is separate. If you're going to be parking a car there, I think there is an added cost per month to do that.
Okay, so staying on this conversation about parking and parking policies, we've heard from other communities, even when parking minimums are reduced or eliminated, there still may be an issue because investors worry less parking will impact leases. What's been all of your experience with the current investors and their comfort level with having reduced parking requirements?
Well, Kim, there's an interesting thing in affordable housing when you're building a mixed income community like Parsons Place, where you have market rate units and you have affordable units, which is we are not allowed to provide something that's considered an add-on for the market rate units that we don't provide for the affordable units. So we can't actually unbundle parking from the units, because if there's an additional charge for parking, that's seen as something that the affordable units can't, it's additional charge that the affordable units can't afford. And so it's something we're offering the market rate tenants that we're not offering the affordable tenants. And so the result of that is we don't have this option in affordable housing to unbundle the parking. Our only option is to change the zoning and to get a variance so that we can reduce the parking requirements. So when we're building at Parsons, and we know that many of the people at Parsons don't have cars and they're using transit for their transportation, or they only have one car, we still have to build those minimum park. We still have to build that minimum parking because we have to provide it for every unit.
Okay. Okay, great. So the city of Chicago recently adopted an equitable TOD plan as a result of previous TOD policies, leaving many communities behind. So what do you all think can be done in St. Louis to strive for development that is geographically diverse and doesn't leave historically disinvested neighborhoods behind, especially those in close proximity to transit? Any thoughts on that?
I think the economic justice plan that the city has, and then its scorecard for incentives, that scorecard specifically gives projects points for two things that involve transit. One is proximity to transit, and the second is infrastructure. Are there contributions or improvements in the infrastructure, including transit? I think that is a way that it is starting. I don't know if it's going to have, and that's a more of a structured incentive program. The way I read the Chicago program, it has microloans and items like that, which are great, but it's another way of approaching it. But I think right now with the economic justice plan and the scorecard that comes with it, I think there's a way there.
Okay. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that one?
It talks a little bit about the contrast between the city of St. Louis and the city of East St. Louis, which is we have a lot of, because of the fragmentation of the region, because of all of the different municipalities, MetroLink goes through an absurd number of cities in each place it touches, and doesn't have stations necessarily in each of those cities. There is a question about capacity and how these smaller cities can develop the capacity, or how we can work regionally through East-West Gateway, through Bi-State, through the regional venues to bring capacity to these smaller cities like East St. Louis, where they don't have the resources, they don't have access to resources, they don't have large city offices and city staff who can work on this. And so how can we bring capacity to a city like East St. Louis to say, here's what you can do, and here's how you can assemble. There was a comment in the Q&A about vacant land in East St. Louis. And if you look at an ownership map of all of that vacant land, each parcel is owned by someone different. And a lot of the parcels are owned by people who are not in East St. Louis. And it's hard to locate those people. So how can you work on a land assembly plan around the stations so that the land is assembled and ready for development for when someone can put a package together and finance something there.
Okay. Okay, great. So there's a question on, are the parking requirements for the Expo project from the Forest Park Southeast Form-Based District?
No, they're based on the current zoning that's on the books. The the form-based code outlines for the south building parcel, there is no parking requirement at all for that parcel. So yes, it is adherence to the current zoning.
Okay, great. Thank you. So one question, and Katie, I think you touched on it a little bit, but I think it would be good to hear from all of you. Spell it out directly. What is the biggest challenge or obstacle? Is it capacity? Is it fragmentation on where these stations are located? What do you all view as the biggest obstacle right now from the development side? And John, from your angle as someone trying to entice development around these stations and stops, what is the biggest obstacle out there right now?
I think it's the market. If we were a go-go market like a DC or Boston, there is a very different demand for transit there. We've got some stations downtown that are underutilized. And if you look at the buildings downtown, they are underutilized. We are not in a growth market, but that's not an excuse. I mean, that's a reality we deal with. And So I think an example then is what Jeff Tegethoff did at Expo. That's in an area that actually has demand. There is a market there, but he's gone ahead and taken that, I think, to a transformational level where it's just not another building. He's incorporated some national TOD policies in there. But if there's not a market, it's very difficult to create a market, and a lot of public financing necessary to create a market. Not that that's a bad thing, but it doesn't just happen. And what I am hoping is that what Jeff has created there becomes a mimic for St. Louis, not only as how do I get through financing with a project that doesn't have traditional parking amenities, maybe some other areas, as well as that type of demand for, I want to live that close to, not just close, but on transit, if you will, as Joel noted. And I will pay a good rent for that, as well as Jeff's able to get a good cap rate. Those things will translate out to the development market. And we need more of that in our region. We can't substitute our lack of growth compared to pick another city. It is what it is. So we have to deal with it and move forward with it.
Yeah. Okay. Katie, Joel?
Yeah, I would just add.
Go on, Joel.
I would just add to John's comments. One, I would want to make clear for everybody that's on the panel here, Metro and Bi-State are not the impediment whatsoever. For anybody who's out there thinking about these types of developments, John and his team are go above and beyond trying to figure out ways to make this work. So we need to feel, fortunate that we have proactive people in our transit organizations that are thinking this way. Outside of the points that John had outlined, which I also agree with, Katie touched on it. It really is our fragmentation. We have to figure out how to work together and figure things out and think about it in a bigger scale. It's just this myopic approach of, my parcel, my area, my street, my parking, it's just going to keep holding us back from the growth that John was talking about. We have to think bigger. We have to think regionally. We have to think across the river, north, south, east, west. These transit systems connect people from all over the region. And, for us to really be a city that's growing, we have to be better connected and have to think about, a bigger picture.
Okay. Katie, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to follow on what John was saying, which is that not, from a market standpoint, we don't have as much demand. Our rents are not as high, but our construction costs are not, very much lower, right? There was, Christy had made a comment in the chat about cost of living, and our construction costs in St. Louis, what it's costing to build things, are not that much different than anywhere else in the country. So we're, again, to compare us to a Boston or an LA, the construction costs are about the same, but we can't afford as much debt on a project. And so we're dealing with larger gaps here, and everybody's dealing with a large gap. So we're all going after the same funding and the same pools of funding and competing against each other. And again, to speak to the fragmentation of, there's only so much low-income housing tax credits, and only so much that in the state of Missouri, and only so much that can go to St. Louis. And yet it's a major source of funding for people who are trying to put together affordable housing near transit. And so, how are we working together to support each other, but also we're also fighting against each other because we're in competition, and it's a challenge.
Thank you. So we have a question, John, and I'm going to pose this to you. Why do you believe, what are the specific challenges for developing around the Rock Road station? I know probably a decade ago, we created overlay zoning in Pagedale for that station. What do you view are the challenges around that station?
I mean, my Beyond Housing has been one of the leads on that. My conversations with them have been the cost to remediate the environmental there is large. I'll use that word. And then you pull back with kind of our earlier comments, you know, the ability to fund something in addition to market rate housing there. There's only so many of those dollars available. Not saying that it's a bad location, but there are some issues there that make that capital stack for that project have to stretch through a lot of improvements.
Okay, great. So we are lucky enough to have Don Rowe in the audience today, and he's making lots of comments in our chat box. And I wanted to bring one up and get your thoughts on it. Don posted, forward facing and dealing and upgrading zoning is more desirable for the long term than seeking variances. Do you agree with that as developers?
I don't know how Katie feels about it, but from a design standpoint, I feel that it very much is. You know, I would certainly advocate for as much form-based code design as we can get. You know, I'm not a developer, but we work with a lot of different developers across the region, and you know, I would say the developers appreciate knowns versus surprises, and they going into a project, if they know if something is going to be a constraint or something they need to work with, then they'll figure out how to attack it and solve it. And it's having that very prescriptive in a form-based code. I think it makes it very clear. It's transparent about what needs to happen. I know going in front of the BOA many times, you know, we hear, well, why do we have this form-based code if we're going to ask for variances every time? And you know, it's our challenge as designers to try to hit those marks as much as we can. So I personally am very much in support of as much form-based code as we can get, really for the transparency and for the known aspect of it, and being able to hit those guidelines and be able to make that entitlement process much easier.
Right.
And from a financing standpoint, not just a design standpoint, again, having those knowns. So to apply for many of the grants, many of the subsidies, many of the tax credits, you have to demonstrate that you have zoning approval and that your entitlements are in place. And if that is upfront, that's one less step you have to go through before applying for those things. And so what happens because of the timeline is you either make a design that meets the zoning code, say that we're within zoning, apply for your financing, then turn around, redo your design, go in front of the Board of Adjustments, and you're constantly doing this back and forth. If it's all up front at the beginning, then your design at the beginning gets to be your design at the end, and you're not making changes and you're not making adjustments, and that shortens your timeline. It makes it easier to access those other vehicles for financing. It makes me have to pay Joel less money because he's doing fewer drafts and adjustments. And it's overall, I mean, it makes for a smoother project.
Okay, so question, you know, we have some developers or individuals who work in the development field on our call this morning in the audience. Why are these projects a win? Why would you recommend to groups, top of your head, why it's really important to look at the areas around transit?
Well, from a infrastructure cost for the region, there's been significant investment in the region for transit and those locations. So from that aspect, from a holistic standpoint, you know, it's a way of return on investment for the region. That may not speak to a developer's needs in the market they're trying to meet, though. And yet at the same time, I think there are some areas, Midtown in particular, that I think are incredible examples for it is becoming, it's almost backing into TOD in a disparate fashion. But as those projects start coming online, they're going to blend together and create almost a transit village in that location. I think that can become increasingly a model. I think something also that developers are going to be facing with is, what do you do with an office building if maybe you can't fill them up like you used to do? I think there's going to be some adaptive reuses to the extent those are close to traffic. Those may be great TOD locations, and the parking will be an increasing conversation at some of those locations. So I think that gives everybody something to work on, in particular with those adaptive reuse of the office space.
Okay.
I think one of the things that, and unfortunately Aaron couldn't join us today, but he's been working with John on the North Hanley site, and taking really parking lots, right? I mean, unused or underutilized parking lots that are a sea of concrete, that are not enjoyable to walk by, do not enhance our lifestyles in any way, actually contribute to heat island effects. That infrastructure getting to and from that parking lot is there. You don't have to build new roads. You don't have to build new bridges, curbs, sewers, gas lines, electric, utilities. It's all right there. So the site is there for development, and be able to plug into that existing infrastructure, to me is huge. And we have a few, we have more of these sites throughout the region. And you're focused on your site and be able to build to that. If we can accommodate this parking perception, this parking requirement, and start driving down that cost to build that parking, you're going to see many more developers get interested in that, just because of the sheer cost of what it costs to build that parking. So there will be a market tipping point on what that is, but being adjacent to other modes of transport, it is just a better way to get around. And in addition to, and I would like to see more of this put out as a cost of living benefit of, in a new project, especially, of what your utility costs would be versus what you might have in a single family home. Cost of a car ownership this year just went over $10,000 a year, according to AAA, for the first time. A metro pass is 1/10 of that. So talking to people about how much it would cost to live in their project, I think is an important conversation that we're probably not having enough of, that I think can help entice further development in these, that people can be judicious about how they spend their dollars.
Okay.
And beyond just the affordability, which is the thing that I would say, that if you can connect to transit, then you can bring down these other costs, even if you're not building necessarily affordable housing, but especially if you're building affordable housing. But accessibility and equality are also important, there are people in our region who can't drive. There are people who shouldn't drive. My father, I believe, is on, so I can't mention aging parents because he would deny that he is aging at all.
He is here.
But I did see that he was on. But as we think about older people in our region, as we think about people with disabilities in our region, they can't drive, and so they can't drive and park at a metro station. But if they can live at a metro station, if they can walk to a metro station, if they can walk to a bus station and get to metro, then their quality of life increases. They can continue to be part of our economy and part of our society and have the roles they want. And they're not, stuck at home because they can't do anything, right? They can now contribute, and having an environment for them to be able to feel like they can walk safely around, that they can wheel safely around, which is also very hard when you have these large parking lots around our transit stations, is, someone who has a disability is uncomfortable walking through that, is tired walking through that, is potentially in danger walking and rolling through that.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit. We're hearing a lot about the future of transit in St. Louis. We have a light rail expansion underway in Illinois to Mid-America Airport, with preparation to break ground early next spring on that. And we have lots of conversations around the north side, south side expansion corridor. Can you speak a little bit to the TOD potential along that possible corridor, John?
As that corridor gets defined, there is, particularly in the north portion, significant amount of undeveloped property. And I think that may be then an opportunity for almost what's been talked about so far at this conversation, which is what are those front end zoning items you need to do? What are those front end assemblage items you need to do? And almost overlaying incentives through that area so that it can be totally prepped and primed for, okay, here comes light rail, and within a reasonable catchment area around it, is everything ready to go? And I think that would be a great opportunity for everyone to move to the next step.
Thank you.
And John, as we're identifying stations, looking at what the potential is for the area around it, right? So when you're locating stations on the north side, south side expansion, thinking about what is the opportunity here, not where are the places we can go with the least amount of friction. And I think with the Shrewsbury expansion, they went with the least areas of friction, and which made sense at the time with the politics of the time, but being able to say now that we know what the opportunity is for TOD, maybe a little bit of friction's okay if it means we're getting a great placement for that station.
Okay. So one question that we've had this morning is individuals who are on the call, how do they get involved in these conversations? Where do they find information about potential sites for development? Where do they go?
Well, I would start with the CMT website.
Okay, thanks for the plug, Joel.
I'm just saying there is a lot on there that a lot of work has been done to outline some of those things. So I would certainly look there. In these conversations, ULI talks a lot about these types of things. Does TAP programs. We were just involved in a TAP for the South Grand. Most of these are obviously urban focused areas. So looking at some of these TAP studies that ULI does, a lot of it is transit based. I think the one that was one prior was the one just off of the South Grand or the Grand Corridor, adjacent to the Grand Station. So there's a lot of work that's been out there for people to look at. The form-based codes, as we mentioned earlier, look at that for Forest Park Southeast. It's getting close to being adopted for Skinkford of Oliver, the Central West End. There's a lot of areas within that, as well, that identify certain sites that will, are proposed for a certain scale of development or ideas that have been proposed, with that as a baseline.
Okay, great. Okay. And thank you again for the plug, Joel. That was great.
Nope.
So as we wrap up today, I don't see any additional questions in the Q&A or the chat box, but I did have one final question for all of you. So as panelists today, what do you believe is the key takeaway from each of you to our audience of what you believe will be the greatest impact on creating a positive environment for development around transit?
I think that the urban fabric around stations, and I mentioned the Midtown, what's happening. I think if that, and it doesn't have to look like Midtown, but that model of how it connects, its bus, its train, its bike, it's multimodal, and it's pulling all that together. I think ends up being hey, how can we do one of those that's going to increasingly impact other areas? And I think there'll be some mimicry going on. I think the expo is going to get some of that. We've had some of that from our Swansea project. But I think in particular, the Midtown is going to really strike a different chord.
Katie or Joel, do you have any final remarks?
I would, we've got to get maybe over some of this maybe stigma of transit in St. Louis. The pandemic had certainly hurt ridership and perception of safety and what's going on with everything. And it really is quite remarkable that we have a light rail system as we do for the city of the size that we are. You look around at other cities our size and population, that does not exist everywhere. It's a huge asset that we have here that we're not tapping into. And so I think we need to get over that a little bit and recognize that it's an asset. And, some people's thought of it as a liability is, we need to get beyond that. I think that's important. The whole experience of, when we design, it's thinking about when you get off that train, you get off that bus, what's your experience like to get to wherever you need to go? And, thinking about that pathway, what is that experience like? What is the sidewalk? What is the landscape? What are the public spaces? What are the art experiences that you're going to experience? Going back to my initial comments, our built environment is what we choose to make of it. And, we have the cards that we're dealt, and we can decide how we want to play them. And it's up to us to either demand better, demand more, and hold ourselves and our officials to a higher accountability with that, because it is here. We have it. We have a fantastic organization. We have the infrastructure in place. We need to double down on it and really leverage that to something that's an asset for our region.
Great. Thank you, Joel. Katie,
And I'm not going to be able to follow Joel.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great. So I want to thank all of our panelists today. There was a call to action that was placed in our chat box. We need to talk to our local officials in our municipalities about the need to put the code out there first before a developer comes to you. That's really important. Another item that if you want to get involved with some of these conversations, you can join CMT. Our next transit transformation stop is at the 5th and Missouri station. We're just kicking that off right now. We will be surveying individuals. We will be asking for public comment. Let us know what you would like to see the soft touch at 5th and Missouri to get the conversation going and to potentially tee that station up for something bigger and something more in those parking lots that surround that station. We have a few more comments in the chat box. From Don Rowe, we would be competitive toast nationally without Metro Transit, GRG, and old and new quality sites, places that come with 250 years of history and top-notch design talent. I guess we'll have to invite Don to be on the panel next time so that he can continue to share his wisdom. But again, we want to thank all of our presenters today. There is a lot going on around public transit. You can find out more at our website at cmt-stl.org. You can get involved there as well. There's lots of opportunities to get involved in the conversations. Please also check out our social channels, and we will be talking about our upcoming work and so much more. And if you're not a member of CMT, please consider joining. Thank you again to all of us who have joined us this morning and our panelists. Make it a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.